No, I am not presenting tonight.
Oh, sorry.
So that is a Zoom glitch, and we have put in a work ticket on it because the last 3 months I've been doing it right, but when you get your email, it comes across with last month's program. And so tonight I presented last month, Becky. Tonight we have 3 people from the state of Kansas, and we'll let Lauren go first because he is, I believe, on vacation. So we have Lauren Minnick from Weights and Measures, and he'll talk to us about labeling. And we have Sharon Leister, sorry, Sharon, I don't know, from the Kansas Department of Ag. And she's in the licensing department. And she's the one who busted me because I did not have a certified kitchen. So she is the one who came out and certified the kitchen that I'm using for us to do honey on. And she'll talk about when you need one and when you don't need one. And I knew I was not in compliance, Sharon. Anyway. And then our third person, and this is really exciting, is from the K-State Value Added Food Lab. We have Dr. Kelly Getty is going to talk to us about what they have to offer for us. So this will be an important meeting. So about labels, and we'll start with Lauren. Lauren has spoken to us in person. And first, I want to mention next month we have a real exciting program, and we have Rich Whiskey, and he's from Whiska, and he's from Michigan, and he's going to talk to us about pollen and propolis, collecting it, and then what we can do with it after we collect it. And he's been to our fun day, but gosh, it's been 7, 8, 9, 10 years. It's been a really long time, but I think that'll be a really good talk. And then in October, we're having a Healthier with Honey. We're going to talk about making kombucha with honey, elderberry syrup, and honey jelly. And so we've planned out the next few months. So Lauren, I will let you get started.
All right, thank you. I'm actually not on vacation, so it's not a problem. I was in a meeting in Milwaukee, so I drove back from Milwaukee. We left this morning. I just got home a little while ago, so sorry I didn't get back with you sooner. But I'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to talk about labeling, and if you guys have any questions, either you can raise your hand, put it in the chat, or if you just want to make a comment, I'll try to address it as we go, because sometimes you forget your question, or I forget what I was talking about. So anyway, we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to try to share my screen here. Hopefully that will work. Can everybody see that?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay.
So my name's Lauren Minnick. I'm with the Kansas Department of Ag, Division of Weights and Measures. We've got several responsibilities. They include commercial devices, packaging and labeling requirements, and pricing accuracy. But as Julie mentioned, I'm going to talk about packaging and labeling requirements this evening. And the purpose of packaging and labeling regulation, and most of what we reference is actually federal law. But the purpose of it is to give purchasers enough information so they can make an educated decision when they buy an item. There are 3 main requirements, and they include the identity of the product, who's responsible for the product, and then how much is in the package. And we'll talk about each of those items. So here's an example of a honey label. So the identity has to be on the principal display panel. So that's the side of the package that the consumer is going to see when it's displayed. And that it shouldn't be misleading or deceptive. So it should be, if it's honey, it should be labeled as honey. And we'll talk about a few different things related to that as well. So, honey, you probably know the definition better than I, but it's the substance bees make from nectars of plants. So if it's only honey, then it should be declared as honey. And the part I've included this information in here, but it's nothing we enforce. But since it's a single ingredient food, you don't have to have the ingredient statement on the label. Most foods do require the ingredient statement. It has all the ingredients, calorie information, all that stuff. But if it's just honey in the package, it doesn't have to have that ingredient label. Now, I'm not sure about the other. I think you still have to have the nutrition facts and all those other things. You just don't have to have the ingredients. If it's a honey flavored product, then that has to be clear from the label. You can't call a honey flavored product honey and it not be actual honey. So it's got to be the identity has to be clear and indicate what's actually in the package. So in this instance, we've got sugar-free imitation honey. So that needs, it has to be clear. This isn't honey. It's a, an imitation of honey. And then on the right, this says honey blend syrup, 100% natural. And that, you can't just have the honey on this one. You have to have that syrup. I'm not a big fan of this label. The 100% natural, I think, may lead to some misinterpretation, but I guess if all the ingredients are natural in there, that it probably would pass. But anyway, that's kind of my personal opinion. Honey flavored products, if it's honey and another sweetener, then you do have to have that ingredient label. And it has to accurately identify and describe the basic nature of the food. For example, blend of honey and corn syrup, blend of honey and agave syrup, whatever the case may be. And then you have to include that information in the ingredient statement. So, and again, I'm not an expert on the back part of the label, just the front part, but I tried to include as much information as I could. And then if you have more questions about anything other than the front of the label, I'll try to get you those resources as well. If it's a flavored honey, you can include that in the description on the front panel. So in this case, it says honey, and then it says strawberry honey because it's flavored with an additional flavoring. So you can include that on your label when it's flavored. And then on the ingredients label, on the ingredients label, then you would list that flavoring in the ingredients label as well, not just on the primary display panel. And then declaration of responsibility is the next thing that's required. So you have to include the name and address of the manufacturer, packer, distributor. So in this case, Cooper's Honey, and then they have their PO box and the state and zip code where they're package the item. The name should be the corporate name, or when not incorporated, the name that the business is conducted under. So, if it's got an LLC or some doing business name as that is okay. It should include the street address, city, state, and zip. But the street address may be omitted if the information is available in a directory, telephone directory, or on a website. If it's not, if it's manufactured, packaged or distributed at a place other than the principal place of business, then the label may state the principal place of business instead of where it's actually packaged. But if, if most of you guys are packaging your own, then it would still be, that probably wouldn't apply as much in this case. But if it is packaged somewhere other than the principal place of business, then you can include that information as the responsibility, unless it's misleading. So if it's distributed by, you can indicate that, you can qualify that. So, you're not necessarily saying it's packaged by these people or manufactured by this entity, but they're distributing it. So that's acceptable as well, because they're taking responsibility for the product. Quantity. So the quantity in general, if it's solid, semi-solid, viscous, or a mixture of solid and liquids, it's typically labeled by weight or mass. If it's liquid, then it's fluid volume. If it's a dry commodity, then dry measure. And the other two aren't really relevant to our discussion as much, but linear measure and numerical count are also acceptable. Quantity declarations in some cases. There are some exceptions to the rule. For example, mayonnaise is a solid, but it is labeled by fluid volume. So in this case, this is mayonnaise, it's labeled by fluid ounces. But unless it should generally follow this table unless there is some other generally accepted trade custom or consumers recognize a different way to label items. But honey is labeled by weight. So the declaration should include it can stand alone. You can either say net weight, or you can actually just have, in this case, it could just say 32 ounces on the label. You wouldn't necessarily have to have the net weight, the net weight part spelled out. And then it should use the largest whole units. So in this case, it's got 1 pound and 0.12 pounds. And really this should be, I think 18 ounces is acceptable. And I apologize, I didn't have a chance to review this again before I presented it. So I'm kind of refreshing myself. But it should be expressed in the largest whole unit, and that this 1.12 pounds. So 1 pound is the largest whole unit in this case. And then you can use common or decimal fractions as well. Here's just the same quantity, just stated a different way. So before it was 1.12 ounces, this is 1 pound, 2 ounces. So either way is acceptable. I kind of went through that really quick. So if there's any other questions, let me get out here and looks like we've got at least a hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah. Hey, Lauren, it's Matthew. So I actually have two questions. The word honey, does that have to be the largest print on the label? I thought I heard that somewhere. I just wanted to clarify that.
Not necessarily. Now there are very specific requirements regarding the size of type, but it's specific to the size of the label, and it's not specific to the declaration of quantity. It just has to be clear what the product is. It can't be misleading. If it's so small that it's difficult to read, then that might be considered misleading. So I'm trying to think of an example where honey would be really small.
Yeah,
But-
I mean, obviously, if we're labeling honey, we're going to label it as such. So, okay.
Right. But
Okay.
it doesn't have to be the largest font on the label. No, at least not that I'm aware of. I probably ought to review that, but I don't recall ever seeing that anywhere unless it's specific to honey.
This is Kelly. There is a guideline on nutrition labeling that Londa has put together, and it talks about the font size and in regards to the size of your actual principal display panel. So that is at our website, just to help guide anyone that's trying to figure out that.
If you're able to, can you find that and post that link in the chat by chance?
I'll do that for you.
Thank you. And just because it's on the screen, Lauren, is there a definition of the word raw?
That's a good question. And I would probably refer that to our food safety folks. They would probably have a better understanding of that than I would. I'm not sure. Yeah, I couldn't speak to that intelligently, whether raw is defined.
Okay. Okay. And then Jolie has a question next.
Okay.
So some of us are doing infused honey, and Jim Kelly had a question. In case he's not able to get on and I don't see him on there. Jim, are you on? He's had several beekeepers asking about doing infused honey and CBD oil. What type of license do they need? Do they need a permit from the state using CBD oil? And that might be something that Sharon can answer.
Could
But
be. Yep, I'm zero help with that one. So
Sharon's saying she'll answer that, but I do have another question then. On our labeling, if say we're infusing honey with vanilla, it would just, our ingredient would be honey and vanilla. That would be what our ingredient label would say.
yeah,
Or hot honey is a big thing, like with habaneros or something like that, then. that
yeah,
would be okay.
you could call it vanilla honey, or you could call it honey with vanilla flavoring. I think there's a lot of options when it's flavored, and it's not another, if it's just flavoring and it's not like another syrup or another ingredient that is trying to think of the right word, a large, well, it's more of a, like a syrup or something. If you're just using flavoring, the majority of the product is honey. So I think and again, I'm not great with the nutrition part of it. So if it's not a, by weight, if it's not a large part of that product, then you wouldn't have to say honey and vanilla syrup or honey and agave syrup. If it's just habanero flavored honey or honey with habanero flavoring. So if it's just a flavoring and it's a very small part of that, the front of it can be descriptive in that, that for that item. And then it would have to be included on the ingredients label, but I'm not sure. Again, I'm a little out of my depth when I start talking about those things. So.
Okay. And then I see a lot of times someone will only have their email address on a label, especially a label that they're making themselves. And
if the email address probably isn't enough. we have accepted websites. If the website also has the information I described, the location, the city and state, or who's distributing or who's packing or who's manufacturing, but yeah, email address is probably not sufficient. And I understand when you're not a corporation or you're working out of your home. I understand not necessarily wanting your home address out there. So that's kind of I guess I would suggest maybe using a PO box in that case, if you don't want your home address, published on your item. And that's a PO address is acceptable. I know that's an additional expense, but
so this may be a little bit semantics, but if someone's just selling honey to not at a farmer's market, right? Not at a sort of a public location, but selling honey to their neighbors, selling honey to coworkers, it still has to have the label that meets all the requirements, right? There's no loophole for just not having a label at all.
If it's packaged, it has to have a label.
Okay.
So
right.
Now, if you just got a big pot of honey and everybody comes over and fills up their own bottle, then no, you don't have to have a label.
Right.
But yeah, if you're packaging it, once it's in a package, it does have to have a label.
No, I've just seen a lot of honey being sold online, particularly like in Marketplace, that has no label at all. That that's just bottled up and
yeah.
So.
Yeah, we're way well behind addressing some of these things. I'll be honest with you. So we try to get our arms around it, but
yeah, no, understand. I just wanted to make sure for clarity in case anybody ever asked.
Yep, you bet. Yeah, once it's in the package, it has to have the label. You bet. Anyone else?
Yeah, Susan had a question. Would phone number and city and state be sufficient?
Yes. Yep. Yeah, it looks like someone posted the food labeling link as well. So
Yeah, thank you, Kelly. That's great.
looks like Marcia has a question.
Yeah, just I have all that on my larger bottles, but I have the little tiny 2-ounce Honey Bear that there's not a whole lot of room on that label, obviously, because it's so small. Website and telephone number, is that good enough? The website has the address and everything else.
Yeah. Okay. I'll be honest with you, technically what we reference says it has to have the other stuff, but we're accepting websites when it has that other information. And that, we need to work on updating that reference. So, but yeah,
Okay.
We'll accept the website if you have the other contact information on your website.
Okay, but it's just only on that really small label because you can't you can't get everything
Right.
else on there.
Right.
Yeah,
So it's like something had to give.
Yep.
right. Can I interrupt? This is Kelly again. If you look even at larger companies, they just sometimes have the name of the company and the city and the state. So they do not have, and they are not required to have like a street address or anything along those lines. So, so that's something for you all to think about, because they're making the assumption that if you look them up in the phone book or whatever, one way or another, they can find you by the location, and then that they've got the information they need. So just if that helps anybody from a regulatory standpoint.
Yeah, if you're and that's probably where it get with a lot of you folks, it's a little different. But if the business is listed in a directory or on the website, then you don't have to have the street address, just city, state, and zip is acceptable. And you do see that a lot. But if you don't have your business listed somewhere, and again, a website is acceptable when it has the other information. So hopefully I didn't make that more confusing, but anyone else? All right. Well, thanks for having me again. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Lauren. I appreciate it. And I'm glad you're back from Milwaukee safe and
Me
sound.
too. Me too. All right. Have a good night.
Mhm. All right. Sharon, would you like to go next? Sharon is, or did I have? Helen?
Yep, I sure can.
So I'll let you introduce yourself and,
Okay, I apologize in advance. I have 2 dogs and I am situated on a popular dog walking area. So if you hear a lot of barking, just kind of ignore it. I am a food processing inspector with the Kansas Department of Agriculture. I am also a credentialed FDA investigator, and I service basically the southeast region of the state. And here, let me share my screen. Here we go. So I got to pull up my presentation. Okay. Oh, wrong one. So let me switch everything around. Okay. Not used to doing presentations with multiple screens. Okay, so there we go. Your screen. All right. Are you seeing the presentation or are you seeing my notes?
seeing your notes, the presentation and your notes.
Okay. Let's see here.
Yeah, if you do regular presentation instead.
Well, let's see.
Do it without notes. Or unless you need the notes. We
Yeah,
don't mind.
I need the notes.
Okay.
There's some let's see.
Do it with the notes then.
We got it. I think I got it. There we go.
Great.
Are you seeing just the presentation?
Yes.
Yes, that's it.
Good. Okay. So I am going to not just talk about honey, but I'm going to talk about some other aspects with food safety today. And we will definitely get to the honey. You just kind of have to bear with a little bit of education prior to honey. So why do we have food safety requirements? It's because of foodborne illness. In 2011, the CDC foodborne illness estimates for the US 48 million cases, 128 hospitalizations, 3,000 deaths. And in 2012, the cost estimate was $77 billion. So food safety is really important no matter what we do or where we're at. But the real impact is the way it affects people. And in 2006, Arlene was diagnosed with salmonella. She had diarrhea, nausea, cramps, vomiting, fever, and felt so weak she couldn't stand. She spent a few days in the hospital and then was released to go home on antibiotics. Her bowel problems continued, and a stool sample revealed that she now had Clostridium difficile. 8 to 30 bowel movements a day. She became housebound and had to know if there was a bathroom nearby. She carried extra clothes with her just in case she didn't make it to the bathroom. Her life continued to revolve around her bowel movements. And then in August 10th of 2016, Grayson's symptoms started with diarrhea and vomiting. The next day, his parents took him to the pediatrician where they diagnosed him with the stomach flu. Unfortunately, he continued to get worse and they discovered blood in his stool. His parents took him back to the pediatrician and advised to head straight to the Indiana University's Riley North Hospital. Grayson was in constant pain and having diarrhea every 10 minutes. They watched their son get worse by the minute. He was finally diagnosed with hemolytic uremic syndrome, or HUS, the Jack in the Box. It's a serious life-threatening kidney disease, and his stool sample came back positive for E. coli. The strand was a shigatoxin producing strain, one of the deadliest types. The HUS was caused by the E. coli, and Grayson's pain was so bad that medication wasn't even helping. The doctors inserted a nasogastric tube and a dialysis tube to relieve the pressure in his abdomen. They then sedated him and put a breathing tube in so that his body could rest. After a few hours, his hemoglobin dropped to nearly 0 and his heart wouldn't pump on its own. Unfortunately, Grayson did pass away. And one of my coworkers would probably get irritated with me, but she was in the ER yesterday all day with her daughter, who is out of the home. She was severely dehydrated because of diarrhea and vomiting. When my colleague took her daughter back after getting her situated back to her home, she looked in her refrigerator and there was outdated sandwich meat that her and her roommate had been eating. So there's a good possibility that her symptoms, her vomiting and diarrhea, was coming from consuming the outdated hamburger or the outdated sandwich meat. So it happens a lot of times. People get foodborne illness. They don't even realize that it's foodborne illness because it comes and it goes so quickly. In Lancaster, Ohio, in 2015, at a church dinner, potato salad from home canned potatoes. There were 25 confirmed cases of botulism, 25 hospitalized, and 1 death. So unfortunately, foodborne illness can still cause issues. So our purpose is to promote, serve, and grow the state's largest industry. We have a compliance approach where we educate, warn, and we enforce. We evaluate systems, and we encourage dialogue before, during, and after the inspection. If you ever have a question, you'll see my contact information at the end of the program. And you can reach out to me by way of email if you have any questions. So I have a little pop quiz. Our program assistant manager loves this example. So we have potato salad. What components of potato salad require refrigeration? The eggs? Yes, definitely. Everybody knows the eggs. The celery? The celery is a maybe. If it was cooked first, then it's going to be potentially hazardous. If it's not, odds are it's not. Potatoes are a yes. Heat treated starch is wonderful for growing bacteria. And that's something to remember when we start talking about some of the honeys that you guys produce. The mayonnaise, no. Commercially prepared mayonnaise is acidic and inhibits bacterial growth and or toxin formation. And many homemade mayonnaise are also very acidic. Refrigeration historically is to prevent separation of the egg and the oil. It is not to prevent bacterial growth. And if you look, you now have mayonnaise squeeze bottles next to ketchup and mustard. So that's some of the science behind food safety. Depending on what you produce, we do have a flow chart to actually direct you to what type of licensing you need. But you guys will all need food safety and lodging program licenses if you meet the requirements. All of our laws and regulations are available at agriculture.ks.gov, public information, statutes, regulations, and guidance. And they're all under the program tab as well. So we do have a sampling exemption. So anybody who provides food samples without charge to promote, advertise, or complement the sale of food or associated equipment. Sample means a small quality of food and does not include a meal or entree. So the sample must be a small amount of food. You can't charge for the sample. And you must follow sanitation and hygiene regulations in the Kansas statute, even though you don't need a license. There is a 6-day exemption for producers. No license for a person operating a food establishment for less than 7 days in any calendar year. It must be 6 or fewer days in a year, not 6 events, which we have seen people try to get away with. So if you go to 6 events and 2 of those events are 2-day eventers, you're at 8 days and you would require a license. Person does include partnerships. And you also must follow the Kansas statute for sanitation and hygiene regulations. And you cannot do any wholesale or further distribution. It all must be to the end consumer. There is a direct-to-consumer exemption, which some of you may fall under. No license is required for a person who produces food for distribution directly to the end consumer. So what that means is if you're giving it to the person that's going to eat it, or you're giving it to the person who's buying it for their family to eat, you don't necessarily need a license. As long as the product is not specialized in its processing. So you're not drying, you're not canning, doing anything that requires special processing. And you still must follow the Kansas statute, and it cannot be for wholesale or further distribution. Honey exemptions. This is what y'all are anxiously waiting for. The food processing plant does not include any operation or individual beekeeper that produces and distributes honey to other business entities. If the producer does not process the honey beyond the extraction from the comb. Extraction includes the rough filtering. So if all you're doing is filtering it and packaging it, you have an exemption right there. Now, that also pertains to non-potentially hazardous foods. So if you are producing non-potentially hazardous foods and you are selling directly to the end consumer, and you're not doing any specialized processing, you're not needing time or temperature to control food safety, there is an exemption for that. and you would not need a license. Okay. Okay, so did I skip a slide? No, I did not. Okay, so what is honey? Honey is actually not defined in federal law or by Kansas law. And all ingredients must be disclosed in any food. So if you're putting anything other than honey in the food, or anything other than the raw honey from the comb into the package, it's got to be disclosed.
Hey, Sharon, this is Matthew. I apologize. Can you go back a slide? I'd like to clarify.
Yep.
So when you say, so in the first exemption,
Mm-hmm.
well, let me ask my real question. If I want to sell my honey at the local coffee shop, and can I sell my honey to the coffee shop and have them resell it?
No, you cannot, and that will be in a further slide.
Okay, that's what I thought, but this first part confuses me. I'm not sure what this exemption gets you, but okay.
This exemption gets you able to sell it to your friends and your coworkers without a license.
Okay.
Or at the farmer's market.
Yeah, or at the
Or
farmer's
at the
market.
farmer's market.
Mhm.
Okay, well, the
Hey,
first
I've-
one
I've
talks
a-
about distributing it to a business entity, so that's what was confusing me.
Yes.
Yeah, I have a question on that one. If you go back to that slide, Matt, to dovetail off of Matt's question, that first exemption, it says to another business. So if I were to sell to a bakery, would that be fine?
No,
I have to have a,
that will be discussed in another slide.
okay.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that your answers are consistent with what we've heard from other people, so.
Okay.
Yeah, that's correct. That's what I'm trying to figure out as well.
So let's see. Some of the issues with honey are the standard of identity. There's no set standard. There's no legal definition. And adulteration, which is mostly economic, like if you're sticking corn syrup in with your honey or agave and not declaring it. And then the animal drug fluoroquinoline, I think I'm pronouncing that right, has been found in honey at times. And then safety is, of course, the infant botulism potential and a not very common gray anatoxin, which is honey from the rhododendron nectar. And there is a product out there called Mad Honey that they advertise as the rhododendron honey. So with labeling, just a brief summary. Nutrition labeling is required if it's required if you're meeting a certain volume or you make a health or nutrition claim. So that's the big takeaway. Lauren covered pretty much everything else. So one of the things that they did want me to tell you about was the direct to consumer food sales. What types of foods can be prepared in a home kitchen and then sold without a license? And those are foods that do not require temperature control for safety. Baked goods, candy, jelly, and etc. But not all baked goods and not all jellies are exempt. And it can only be sold to the end consumer. So basically, if it requires temperature for control, it cannot be sold direct to consumer without a license. And it cannot be sold to an end consumer or to another person for resale or future use. Cream pies, cheesecakes, salsas, barbecue sauce, cut produce, meats, sprouts, pickles, and canned vegetables are all under time as a control or temperature as a control. And if you want to know if your food is shelf stable, You can send it off to have the pH tested or a product authority or a process authority testing done on it, and K-State Value Added Lab can do that for you. So even though if your food is exempt, you still have to follow hygiene and sanitation from Kansas statutes, even if you don't have a license. It just means that you're not going to be inspected. So when is a honey license required? Well, any product, if it requires temperature control for safety. When the product is being wholesaled for further distribution. So you would need a license for your honey production if it is being wholesaled for further distribution. And one of the main things with that is the product is being sold to another licensed facility, or has to be sold to a licensed facility. That licensed facility has to receive product from an approved source. And the way the source gets the approval is through licensing. Or when the product is being sold to a licensed food establishment, like a grocery store, a convenience store, a specialty store, or a bakery. So anytime that you are selling something to a licensed establishment, you in turn would need to have a license in order for them to accept it. Does that answer your question?
Well, so that's and I'm going to ask a question because that is somewhat contradictory to what we've heard in the past. Now, I can't quote somebody to argue. Does it matter if it's being sold in bulk or if it's individually bottled?
If it's being sold in bulk, you do not need a license. If it's being sold by the bottle, it needs to be sold, or it needs to be licensed.
Okay, good. Then that does match what we've heard.
Yeah.
So if I'm selling it to a bakery that's using it, if I'm selling a 5-gallon bucket to a bakery or a winery, that they're going to use it as part of their.
And you're fine.
Okay.
Yeah. When I busted Jolie, sorry, Jolie, when I busted Jolie, the gentleman was purchasing her individual bottles, and it wasn't in bulk. Now, the exemption covers the raw honey with only extraction being done. If you are adding anything, if you are doing any type of further processing after extraction from the honeycomb, if you're adding that agave, if you're adding any type of thinner, if you are making an infusion, you will need to have a license. And if you are making like a hot honey with habanero, especially if you have the peppers themselves in that honey product, you will need a processing authority letter in order to safely assess the product and make sure it is not potentially hazardous. Same thing with jams and jellies. If you make anything that's got peppers in it, that can push it over into a potentially hazardous food.
Okay, and I have one more question before we get into the infused, because I feel like there's probably going to be a lot of questions in that area.
Mm-hmm.
If I bottle honey with my label and I sell it to my local coffee shop, and I think I heard you say this, do they also have to be licensed?
The coffee shop has to be licensed, yes.
So I could not sell it to a retail establishment that did not have a food processing license. Is that correct?
No, they have to have a retail license.
Oh, a retail license.
Yes.
Okay.
We have two types of licenses. We have a food processing license, and then we have a retail food establishment license. The retail food establishment license allows people to sell product directly to the end consumer. And it's going to be like a gas station, a coffee shop, a grocery store, your local Pizza Hut.
Okay, so it couldn't be an antique store.
You can sell your honey to an antique store without a license as long as it is not further processed past the extraction point.
Are you saying we can't bottle it? You can't, but the next.
No,
process
you
is
can
we
bottle, it. That includes bottling.
So
But
it's extracted, it's been
I'm so
bottled,
confused.
and you can take it to an antique shop without having a processing license.
right, you can extract it. You can do that rough filtering. Is that what it's called? And you can package it. You can put it in the bottle. You can take that to the antique store, and the antique store can sell it.
How is okay, so I'm very confused then.
Mhm.
How is an antique store different from a local coffee shop?
Okay, so
If I can sell it in an antique store without them having a food, why does it matter that the local coffee shop has one?
well, I am assuming that your antique store that you're selling it at only has food, is only selling your honey. There is an exemption for a retail license that if the facility is selling less than a space of 200 cubic feet of food product, and that includes the storage of what their back storage, then they do not need a license. But if their storage area and their display area is over 200 cubic feet, then they need a license. If it's under 200 cubic feet, they do not need a license. So when I was
Interesting.
answering that, I was assuming that they're only selling your honey and you're not providing them over 200 cubic feet of honey.
Okay.
Okay. Does that
Yes.
clear as mud?
Yeah,
Okay,
it's clear as mud. So like
So
hardware
I-
stores and stuff of that nature would be probably in that realm.
Yeah.
okay,
So I have
can I
sorry.
throw an, okay, so I've bottled my honey product. Let's just, if I had a booth at an antique mall, could I put my honey in there, packaged honey available for sale without an additional license?
Is it under 200 cubic feet?
Is what, the square footage of my space?
Yep.
Got it. So if it's under 200 square feet, even though I'm not stocking it all with honey, if it's under 200 square feet total, even if there's 10 jars of honey in it, I don't need a
No,
processing license.
no, as long as you keep it under 200 cubic feet.
Cubic feet. Okay, got it.
Which isn't a lot.
Okay, so my question is, and I might have misunderstood you, but John was selling my honey bears on his website,
Mm-hmm.
and that was what you got me on, not the fact, because I thought you even said to me that it was okay for me to sell him honey for his cookies, or his granola, whatever he was using it for. Even though I didn't have a licensed kitchen at that time. So that's what I'm confused about now.
So John was reselling your product. So you were providing product for distribution.
Right, but I was
And the
also
license-
selling him honey to use as an ingredient in one of his products.
Yeah, you would still need a license because he's licensed, so he would have to get all of his ingredients from a licensed facility, from an approved source.
Okay, because I thought you were pretty specific that that wasn't what this was about. So, okay, good to know.
Okay. All right. Any
Thanks,
more
Sharon.
questions? Okay, so actually in the fine print, even though you may not be required to be licensed, you still need to follow the safety requirements of the Kansas food laws, which hopefully you all do. So like I explained, our license types, we have food establishment, which is direct to the end consumer, and then food processor, which is for further distribution or wholesale. Now, licensing at private residences, because I know some of you might do this at home. You might have your extraction area and then package it in your home. It does have to have a separate kitchen if you need to be licensed. You need to have the proper equipment for the processes being used, and you need to have proper storage areas and proper labeling for packaged products. And if you look at the pictures, this is a sauce producer, and an inspector walked in and he was storing his sauces by his bed, which isn't really a good place to store product.
Is there a something written somewhere with those proper things that you just had on the last slide?
I do have, you have to
Like-
meet the licensing requirements, and I do have, it's called it's basically licensing requirements. They've named it funny, like new business requirements for food processors. But I do have that I can share with anybody that needs. It's something I have to email you.
Sorry, okay.
Also, if you look on, if you go to the program page or the www.agricultural.ks.com, where the regulations are. No, you go to our program, the food, drug, and lodging, look under the program tab and go to food, drug, and lodging, and they have handouts. There is a licensing requirement handout that will cover that, of what you need to pass a licensing inspection. And so a lot of people use shared kitchens. I think there was one kind of trying to start up in the Leavenworth area, I believe. So these are often called incubator kitchens. Each person is required to be licensed, and they must have their own license in the shared kitchen. There are no certified kitchens in Kansas. So someone can build a facility that meets the requirements for licensing. They do not have to get that facility licensed, but they can still rent it out to other people to use. And the people that they rent it to have to get their own license.
And I think this is a good distinction for all the beekeepers on the call, particularly when you're talking to other people, that, you know, there's an assumption that I feel like out there that if I have a licensed kitchen, someone, you know, another beekeeper could come to my facility and bottle their honey and it be, you know, quote, licensed in a facility, but that's really not the case. So that's a good distinction, Sharon. I think people need to be aware of that.
Now, if you work together and both your names are on that label and you take the responsibility for that product when it's in the field or out in commerce, that's okay. But you're not going to want to take that risk for the other person. So they need to make sure they have their own license and they put their own information on the label and they use nothing of yours.
Sharon, how much does a license cost?
Licenses are based on the size of the facility. And give me just a second. Let me pull up that information. I have too many books in my office.
It is listed in the application form if you have that as well.
Yeah, that's what I pull it off of. So if you're under 1,000 square feet, the application fee, which is a one-time fee, is $175, and your annual license fee is $150. So to get started, it's going to be 325 and then 150 each year after that. And then as your size goes up, 1,000 to 5,000, it's going to be $200 license fee per year with a $200 application fee. And it goes up in, the application fees go up in $50 increments after that. And the license fees go up in $75 increments. Except between 10,000 and at the 10,000 break, it's only a $50 increase per year. And licenses run April 1st through March 31st. They are not prorated and they are non-transferable. So if you get a license and 6 months later you decide that you want to move to a different location, you have to complete the entire process again, and there's no proration on either license. And that's pretty much my presentation.
Hey,
So-
Sharon, I have a quick question. Why is Kansas worried about the licensing to sell honey wholesale? The state next door to us doesn't require it. I come from a state. I was there in the state for a little while. They didn't require it. Is there some reason that Kansas requires it compared to other states?
It's all based on legislation and what legislation decides that they want to focus on.
I mean, Missouri has the same law. You can sell to the end user, but for wholesale, you need to have a kitchen, doesn't it?
No, they just passed it. North Carolina also doesn't. When I was stationed in North Carolina, you could go to the local grocery store, the local hardware store, and, find Buck's honey or, Jolene's honey, there, as long as they could get it on the shelves.
Yeah,
they have same standard practices though, the same general guidelines. You had to follow the labeling laws, you had to follow, stuff like that. But, just with the low risk of honey compared to other products, it seems like a barrier to entry unless you have, that commercial kitchen in there that, like Matt was saying, if I just want to sell at my local coffee shop and sell a couple hundred bottles, I can't do that because I've got to pay $300 and whatever it is, the cost, because it's only $300 to get the license, but it's also, sometimes up to $100, $1,000 to get, another separate kitchen, certified to get it up to code.
yeah. Each state adopts their own codes and regulations based on what FDA puts out. And I do know that, or I do believe that FDA allows it to cross state lines if it's only gone through the extraction process. But if you do any type of infusions or anything like that with FDA, you do have to be registered, even with FDA.
I have two questions. If I buy bulk honey from another beekeeper and bottle that as my own, are there any restrictions around that?
No, not if it's in bulk.
Okay.
And as long as you're not changing it.
Right. No, that's what I'm saying. I'm still on the raw honey thing. I know the infused honey, it opens up a whole nother can of worms.
Oh, yeah.
So I just wanted to make sure that if I'm buying 5-gallon buckets from Buck, and bottling it and putting it, with my name on it, that there's no requirements from his side, from his perspective. So, okay.
No.
All right. I had a second question related to the previous topic, but I forgot it. So I'll wait.
Well, if we get off the program and you remember it, write down my email address and send it to me.
Okay.
There's a couple questions in the chat box.
Okay.
Ste-
So let me
Stephanie
stop
wants-
sharing.
Sorry.
Okay. So
The first ones you kind of answered. I think we're down to Stephanie had a question about, can you make a batch of creamed honey for the Boy Scouts or a nonprofit to resell without a license?
No, you cannot. Once you start creaming honey or infusing it or making any kind of variation beyond the initial extraction, you have to have a license.
So as long as you are selling it to your end consumer, you still have to have a license.
If it is not, if it's past the initial extraction, if it's past that and you are creaming it or adding something to it, that is considered further processing, and that knocks you out of that exemption.
Okay. So you can't build a batch and give it to somebody or sell it to somebody and they resell it unless you have a license.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
You can make a batch and you can give it to somebody and they can eat it and you don't take any money for it and you're fine. But the minute you sell it or you know that they are going to resell it, you are required to have a license.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Are there any other in the chat?
Brad had a question. What's the definition of bulk? Where do you draw the line? What's considered bulk? And that's probably not a clear-cut answer.
It's not a clear-cut answer, but generally what we view is if you've got it in, I call them pickle buckets, but like 5-gallon buckets, that's bulk.
Okay.
If it's in any type of squeeze bottle, any type of pourable bottle that is easy for the consumer to handle and use, then that's not bulk.
One of the
Okay.
other questions,
Go ahead, Denise.
one of the other questions that was raised was the definition of raw, and it was diverted, I believe, to you.
Yes, it was. There is no definition for raw. We do not have a defined definition for raw. Generally, for retail establishment, raw means that it is in a form where you have to cook it in order to make it edible. And so they haven't really narrowed down what raw is.
Okay. Well, it just on that previous label that was being displayed, I kind of take maybe a little bit issue with the word raw and also grade A, only because grade A means something I think personally feel is a little bit different than raw, but that's just my thing.
And I will tell you with labeling, labeling is very complicated. Whenever an inspector goes out, like a food processing inspector, and does an inspection at your establishment, we always look at a label. We look for the basics. We are not looking to see what size it is. Weights and measures might do something different, but we personally do not. If we feel that there is an issue, because labeling is so complicated, we will send it off to FDA and have them review it, because they have staff dedicated that do nothing but review labels and look at labels.
Okay, and
Sharon?
since you're an inspector, and I'm very close to submitting my application, when you're doing the inspection, you're only looking at the bottling process, right? My understanding is that the extraction process isn't part of the inspection.
No, the extraction process is not part of the inspection. We are looking at your bottling facility, basically, and your bottling process.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
Comb or chunk honey. So you're not really extracting it, are you? You're just cutting it out of the comb. Is that correct?
Correct.
Correct.
Okay, that would be exempt because you're not further processing it.
Exempt from what?
Exempt from needing a
The
licensed
license.
kitchen. Yeah.
It's going to have the same process, basically. if you're going to be selling it
In a package, it's going to be in a package. You
in a
can't sell it.
package, if
Right.
you're going to sell it to a licensed facility so that they can then resell it, it's got to be licensed.
Yeah, I don't think comb honey or chunk honey is exempt from anything that just like raw honey wouldn't be.
Yeah.
Because based on my conversations with Adam, the whole deal here is all about whether it's packaged or not. If
Yep.
it goes into a bottle or a plastic something, it's considered packaged, and at that point, you've got to be licensed. If you can figure out how to sell it without putting it in a package, then it might be exempt.
Yeah, that is correct. Okay, are there any other questions? And I put my email in the chat. I think it's right. Yeah, it's right. So if you guys think of any other questions, please feel free to reach out. And if you're in my area and you need more information, or even if you're not in my area and you're thinking about getting licensed and need more direction, reach out.
Where's your area?
My area is southeastern Kansas. So I go from basically Johnson County down to Oklahoma. And then I go from Missouri to Chautauqua, Elk, Greenwood. And then I kind of angle up Franklin, Osage up to Johnson County. So if you're in the southeast quadrant.
Are you sharing that space with somebody, or did you replace somebody? I had a gentleman come out and do a pre-inspection with me. I don't remember what his name was.
When was the pre-inspection?
Buck, when was that? You had the same guy. You remember his name?
Jeffrey?
Not without going back and looking at my emails, but it was probably, it was in the wintertime.
6 months ago, 8 months ago.
I'm going to say it was Jeffrey. And we have added, we lost one inspector and we added another inspector. But I've had that territory for a little while now.
Okay. No,
But-
I was just curious because somebody else, when Buck and I both had a pre-inspection with a gentleman, Adam turned us on to him. So
I'm gonna bet it was Jeffrey, and it was probably because I was tied up in other things and couldn't get out to you fast enough.
okay.
We do tend to do that. We have inspectors that do specialized inspections. And when we get tied up in those types of inspections, some of the other inspectors have to help us cover.
He's a mead maker. Does that help? He makes mead. So he was very familiar with honey.
That would be Daniel.
Yes, that's who it was. That's who it was.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I just checked my email. It was Daniel.
That would be Daniel.
Is he still around?
He is still around.
Okay.
He is assigned the northeastern section of Kansas. So he goes above me
Okay.
and then back west. But there's 4 of us and we have a district manager. So between the 5 of us, we cover the entire state.
All right, if there aren't any other questions, Sharon, I really want to thank you for this. This was very, very helpful, and obviously there were a lot of questions, so I'm glad we did that tonight. So I really
Nice try trying
appreciate
to get off
your
the hook,
stepping in.
Jolie.
Yeah, that's good. All right, I think that we are ready now for our third topic, which is and Dr. Kelly Getty will be doing that, and she's going to talk to us about how the Kansas State Value Added Food Lab can help us. So, all right, Kelly, you are on. Yeah, good job.
All right, can you all see that?
Yes, very good.
All right.
Let's see, we can see your slides on the side too, if maybe just go to presentation mode.
Now are we
There you
all?
go. Yep, good job.
Okay, all right. So I'm going to make it try to short and sweet because I am at the end of the program. I realize that. And let me go back one slide. So basically, we are the Kansas Value Added Foods Lab. And there are two co-directors. Some of you may know Fadi. I joke that Fadi was a one-man show. It took two women to replace Fadi, but they forgot to tell you those two women already had full-time jobs. So I do the food safety work. I am also the process authority. And I do help with some of the shelf life studies. And just this week was working on a shelf life study with a hot honey. And so, yes, I ended up finding out some standards for microbial from Malaysia. And there are standards of identity in the Codex Alimentarius, which is an international guideline. So Sharon is totally correct. I had to go international to look and find some information I needed from a food safety standpoint to make sure the numbers we were looking at were acceptable. So for your Karen Blakesley serves as the co-director, and she literally does the nutrition labeling and oversees those. But really, as you can see, it's a team effort. We have food science students, and they are the ones that do the everyday, keep us sane, and keep us going and moving. And they are mostly, as I said, mostly all food science students, range from sophomores to seniors. And they're our team. They run the analysis for us, and they start your label for you. They'll start some of the calling and communication if there's any type of analysis you need to have done. So what do we do? So for instance, in that honey, probably the most important thing with honey are 2 or 3 things you would want to know. One, it would be the water activity from a safety standpoint. Also, the moisture content. Really, water activity and moisture content, they're not really the same thing, but the lower that moisture content, kind of that standard of identity, helps you in that crystallization process so that your honey won't crystallize as much. And of course, we talked about raw honey that you just extract, or sometimes people will heat their honey to 120 to 130. We were looking at some of the work, and that does help. But if you're doing something where it's a hot honey, or you're putting in peppers or jalapenos, that may not be enough heat, especially to give us that reduction you need. So those are important aspects. Bricks, that maybe if you're trying to maybe do an infused honey or a syrup, for instance, then you would want to know that's soluble solids so you can get that correct every time. A microbial analysis may be important. We would use that for shelf life. And then we talk about some other testing down here. These are all for in-state prices and then out of state. So the processing authority letters, if you're just, for instance, you mentioned something like a hot honey. Yes, that's very important because this person decided the honey, the chili peppers that he was using, even though it was a fermented product, we still needed to do a little bit more to guarantee that he had a 5-log reduction. And because we look at pH, and that pH has to be below 4.6 for it to be an acidified food. And that's what I work on, are only acidified foods or acid foods from that standpoint. So maybe you want to do a honey barbecue sauce. That would be another reason to have a process authority letter, and you're heating it correct. I mentioned results letters for direct to consumer sale. I did put that link to the brochure for you. And those are things, if you're doing jams or jellies with honey in them, we would test those for you, or you to know what the pH is and the Brix and the water activity, because those are important parameters to have controlled for me to make the determination. I make those determinations also based on your processing parameters. So when you're looking at processing parameters, I don't like to see words simmer for an hour. Simmer can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. So it's time, when I talk about 2 important words, if you don't remember anything I say at the end of the day, I want you to remember 2 important words: time and temperature. Whatever you're doing in your process, it's important to know that temperature you're holding something at, or you're cooking it at, and how much time. So am I holding it, I bring it to 120 degrees Fahrenheit for how long? Is it only for a few minutes? Is it for only a few seconds? But those things need to be recorded together. That's what is important when I'm looking at the whole procedure. I don't necessarily, it's neat to know what maybe your oven temperature is, or that you're put it in a boiling water bath, for instance. That would be important. I do need to know, because what if your boiling water bath is 212, maybe it's 208, but get a temperature on things. Those are the important things. The other thing, when we look at nutrition labeling, it's important for you to realize some things, that if you're combining, like for instance, you buy ketchup, back to the barbecue, honey barbecue sauce, you buy ketchup and it has a bunch of ingredients in it. And then maybe you put some seasonings in, and then you put your honey. We have to know all the ingredients that are in that ketchup. We have to know all the ingredients that are the seasonings you're putting in. We can lump them together as spices. And then we have to know how much honey you put in. It's important for us to know it in weight, and it's important for us to know the brand of ketchup. We have a database system. So if you're using Heinz ketchup, we can pull that information into our labeling for you to get a nutrition label that is accurate. And so those are some key things that the students will be asking you, or Karen will be wanting to know. We also offer, if you're trying to say, okay, well, I want that. I mean, honey's a single product. It will use a standard label, but if you're trying to do something more specific, we do have a way that we can do a process authority letter if you think you need that. and the nutrition facts panel together. So those are things for you to consider. And we make sure that we're following all the rules and regulations, and so that you get it correct. And so if you're to start your project, we always encourage you to email the Kansas Value Added Foods Lab. That way it's it going to one place where the students then start initially taking care of things, and then they'll say, can you call Kelly, can you call this person, or Karen, can you call this person? And that's important. We've had a phone number here. I'm in the interest of time, I'm not, there is a client and product information for you to fill out if you want to start working with us. And that's very important for you to start. And it's also important for you to maybe talk with our lab team to make sure, you know, how many samples do you need to send in if you're doing a direct sell to consumers, or if you're doing something where you're actually putting it on a retail shelf. So that can be different because we're trying to look at variations in your process. If it would be a basically, like I said, the hot honey would be the example there. So those are some of the things for you to think about, all in all. And at this time, I think I've brought us back a little bit on schedule, and I appreciate your time and just the ability for you to know. And I think you would agree that the comment somebody made earlier about extension, yes, I also teach, and so we're being pulled. So I appreciate somebody saying more extension. People, we're doing our best, and we wouldn't make it without our team of students. So thank you very much to the Kansas Department of Ag for the help. And Sharon, I'm glad to meet you at least via Zoom. We're working on that other issue you're talked about. So thanks, everyone.
Does anyone have any questions for Kelly? I know that the food lab has done dog biscuits for Stephanie that's on here, right, Stephanie?
Yeah, they have done my cream tunnies and my jams as well. But yeah, they're the ones that I started with Dr. Foddy. Loved him. Love you guys too. You guys have been a great help. I got questions, I call, and we work through it. We worked hard on that honey jam, Dr. Foddy and I did. So, but yeah, everything I do, even though that's what I do for a living, I work in a food processing lab. I still have to have my stuff sent out to be certified. I can't do it myself.
Thank you. And yes, I'm amazed at the number of products that we have come in from week to week. And I guess that's what keeps me going, is, you know, this week it was just looking at, is there anything on the plate count for sliced cheese, because somebody in Kansas is making a specific cheese dip and they want to know the shelf life of their product. And then I get the results back and say, okay, well, knowing where this product is, how do those results compare? And I'm using, you know, scientific information to put it all together.
Any other questions for Kelly? I just think this is such a great resource, and I'm glad to hear some of our members are using it. I think it's really important. And what else? All right, you must
So
have done a
Brad
great
mentioned it.
job.
Yeah, so Brad mentioned it in the chat, but I figured if anybody's not paying attention to the chat, and Sharon, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think one of the best things that I did in getting prepared for the food processor license was have, Daniel come out ahead of time and look at the space and tell me, what we needed to do or what I needed to do to make it sort of compliant kind of a thing. And, Buck had the same deal. So you have very different spaces. So I'm assuming, Sharon, that's still an option for people to come out for like a quote pre-inspection.
Yes, we are always happy to do what we call a planning inspection. And we come out and we look at your facility, or I've done them remotely. I have some facilities, food processors that are small facilities, and they're looking to move into a larger facility. They will send me pictures of different places they're looking at renting to get my input on it before they even sign a lease. So we are always happy to do that for you.
And I would say do it, because during my time, right before my end of my PhD, I worked with KBA and with Liz Boyle on the meat side. And there were a few processors that went ahead and were building new facilities and did not get KDA involved. And they were going to have to redo things. So don't get yourself in that space. It's not where you want to go.
Well, Sharon, I was thinking about, and I looked at some food trucks to do that instead of, renting a kitchen or building a kitchen. Would that have been another option?
I do have some food processors that work out of food trucks. So yes, that is an option. It just has to meet all the requirements.
Because I was thinking that might be a cheaper way for us to go before we build one in our house, but okay, thanks. All right. Any questions or any suggestions for other topics in the future? Okay, a lot of great presentations. Thank you, everyone. This was very enlightening. So we really appreciate hearing from everyone. And I think this was a really good topic for all of us.
Yeah, great job, Jolie. Really, really appreciate it. We learn something new every time we sit through one of these. So really good.
Well, good. Well, thank you. That's the thing. So these are presented by the Kansas honey producers. And if you are not a member, we would love for you to join, but you don't have to. And they are all recorded, and they'll be on the website in the next couple of weeks. Robert gets them up there. So they're on the Kansas honey producers website. So, okay, I think with that, we're probably done. Thank you, everyone.